The cathedral looms above you, its stone arches reaching into the heavens like the ribs of some ancient beast, cold and unyielding. You are 8 years old, Agnes of France, standing barefoot on a floor so icy it sears your soles. The air thick with incense that stings your eyes and mingles with a sharp tang of fear, your own and that of the nobles crowded into the shadows. Your small hand shakes as a gold ring, heavy as a manacle and size for a woman, slides over your knuckles, dangling loosely, a mocking symbol of a future you cannot grasp. Beside you, a boy no older than 13, Alexios too, trembles as badly as you do, his thin frame lost in imperial robes. Today, in 1180 AD, you become Empress of the Byzantine Empire, and your childhood ends with the scrape of gold against bone. Before we unravel the forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you're captivated by the hidden truths of history, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and comment below to share where you're listening from. It's extraordinary how these ancient tales bind us across continents and centuries, united by our shared hunger for the past. Born around 1171 to Louis VII of France and his third wife, Adele of Champagne, Agnes entered the world as a political pawn before she could toddle. Her fate was sealed in the cradle. Her marriage contract inked when she was barely 2, a transaction between men who weighed her worth in dowries and territorial claims. Louis, scarred by his failures in the Second Crusade and haunted by the specter of Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to Henry II, which birthed the sprawling Angevin Empire, saw in Agnes a chance to outmaneuver his English rivals. The Byzantine alliance offered a strategic gambit. A French princess wedded the heir of Constantinople could open a second front, diverting Plantagenet attention from French borders. The Byzantine Emperor, Manuel I Comnenus, needed Western allies to counter the Seljuk Turks pressing his eastern frontiers, his empire's grandeur masking a creeping decay. Agnes, a child oblivious to the maps and treaties shaping her life, was the price of this fragile pact. The negotiations unfolded in Palais de la Cite, where French courtiers met Byzantine ambassadors amid flickering candlelight and the rustle of silk. The Eastern delegation arrived with gifts that dazzled the Frankish court. Shimmering textiles from Persian looms, spices that perfumed the air with notes of saffron in clothes, and manuscripts aglow with gold leaf, each a testament to Constantinople's fading wealth. These offerings were not mere gestures, but calculated displays of power, signaling an empire desperate for legitimacy and military aid. Manuel's envoy spoke of a marriage to his son, Alexios, a boy of 11, whose rule would cement ties with France. The betrothal ceremony, held in the royal chapel, was a farce of consent. 7-year-old Agnes stood beside men who spoke for a groom she'd never met, a miniature crown of black sea pearls bowing her small neck. Canon law demanded her agreement. But what choice does a child have when her voice is drowned by the weight of empires? Agnes's final year in France was a whirlwind of preparation, transforming a princess into a vessel for Byzantine expectations. Greek tutors arrived from Constantinople, their voices sharp with impatience as they drilled her in a language that felt like a labyrinth of sounds. She practiced eating with golden utensils, their weight awkward in her tiny hands, and learned to walk with the measured grace of an empress, her steps echoing in chambers where winter winds rattled diamond-paned windows. Religious instruction was relentless, navigating the theological rift between Latin and Orthodox Christianity. Priests explained the filioque controversy, whether the Holy Spirit proceeded from Father alone or Father and Son, with a delicacy that masked its political stakes, knowing these disputes would shape her every prayer in Constantinople. Seamstresses fitted her with miniature Byzantine robes, heavy with silk and gold thread, teaching her to move without tripping under their weight. Dance masters drilled her in stately movements, each gesture a performance of imperial dignity she barely understood. The emotional toll of this uprooting was profound, though history rarely records a child's heart. Imagine Agnes, clutching a doll as tutors barked foreign verbs, her world shrinking to lessons and protocols while her siblings played in the fields of Champagne. Medieval chronicles, like those of Robert Torigny, hint at the isolation of royal children groomed for diplomacy, their lives bartered before they knew their own minds. Agnes's preparation mirrored that of other child brides, like Matilda of England, wed at 11 to Henry the Lion of Saxony, each girl a chess piece in a Game of Thrones. Her journey to Constantinople loomed, a passage across continents that would sever her from everything familiar, plunging her into an empire as dazzling as it was dangerous. As we follow her path, the Golden City and its decaying heart come into view, where a child empress would face a world of splendor and menace. The journey from France to Constantinople was no mere voyage. It was a crucible that forged 8-year-old Agnes of France into a reluctant emissary of empires, her small frame battered by months of grueling travel and the weight of an uncertain future. Leaving the familiar stone halls of the Paletta lost site in 1179 AD, Agnes embarked on a trek that spanned thousands of miles, each step pulling her further from the fields of her childhood and closer to a city that shimmered like a mirage. The French delegation, laden with her dowry, chests of gold, silks, and jewels, traversed landscapes that shifted like pages in a monk's manuscript. They wound through Burgundy's vineyards, where autumn leaves fell like embers, and climbed the jagged alpine passes, where snow stung their faces even in May, the thin air choking Agnes's breath. The Italian peninsula revealed crumbling Roman arches, whispering of empires long dead, a silent prophecy for the Byzantine world she was about to enter. The sea crossing from Venice to Constantinople was a nightmare for a child who had never seen waves taller than her. Mediterranean storms tossed their galley like a leaf, the deck slick with seawater and vomit as Agnes, seasick and trembling, curled up in her cabin for 3 days, unable to eat. French diplomats, their faces gray with worry, debated turning back, but the alliance's stakes, securing France against the Angevin threat and bolstering Byzantium against the Seljuks, drove them onward. When Constantinople's skyline finally pierced the morning mist, Agnes pressed her face to the ship's rail, her eyes wide at the domes and towers glinting like polished gold. The Golden Horn, a crescent of water teeming with Venetian galleys and Genoese traders, pulsed with the commerce of a fading empire, its vibrancy masking the rot within. Agnes's preparation for Byzantine life had begun in France, but intensified upon arrival, a relentless reshaping of a child into an empress. Her Greek tutors, now joined by stern palace matrons, drilled her in the court's intricate dialect, its verbs twisting like the city's labyrinthine streets. She stumbled over words, her accent marking her as an outsider, a Frankish barbarian in the eyes of haughty courtiers. Byzantine protocol demanded she master gestures alien to her French upbringing, prostrating before icons, holding rigid postures during endless ceremonies, and speaking in whispers that carried the weight of imperial decorum. Her small hands learned to grip golden utensils, their innate design slipping through her fingers, while seamstresses draped her in silk robes so heavy they dragged across marble floors. These lessons weren't mere education. They were a transformation, stripping away her identity to mold her into a symbol of alliance. Religious instruction was a battleground of its own, navigating the chasm between Western Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Agnes memorized prayers to saints unknown in France, Saint Basil, Saint Chrysostom, whose icons stared from every wall, their gold halos glowing in candlelight. The Filioque dispute, a theological wedge between East and West, was explained in hushed tones, its abstract terms meaningless to a child but critical to her role in Orthodox rituals. Chronicles like those of William of Tyre described the Byzantine court's obsession with religious precision, where misstep in liturgy could spark diplomatic rifts. Agnes's tutors, aware of this, drilled her relentlessly, her knees bruised from prostrations on marble chapel floors, her voice hoarse from chanting Greek hymns she barely understood. The emotional toll was a silent storm. Imagine a girl, still clutching memories of French meadows, now drowning in a sea of protocol and expectation. Medieval sources, like the Alexiad by Anna Comnena, hint at the isolation of foreign brides in Byzantium, their youth no shield against the court's demands. Agnes's experience echoes that of other child brides, like Theophanu, a 10th century German princess wed Otto II, whose letters reveal a longing for home amid alien splendor. The Byzantine palace, with its sprawling gardens and fountains, was a gilded cage, its beauty a stark contrast to Agnes's growing dread. She was a pawn in a game of empires, her childhood sacrificed to a world that valued her bloodline over her heart. As she stepped into Constantinople's dazzling chaos, the frail figure of Alexios II and the menacing shadow of Andronicus I awaited, ready to shape her fate in a decaying empire. Constantinople in 1179 AD was a jewel encrusted in decay, its walls a fortress against the world yet crumbling under the weight of its own history. And into this labyrinth stepped 8-year-old Agnes of France, a wide-eyed stranger in a land of gold and intrigue. The city sprawled across 7 hills like a living mosaic, its domes catching the sun in bursts of brilliance, while the Golden Horn teemed with ships from distant shores, Venetian galleys heavy with spices, Genoese traders laden with silks, each vessel a thread in the empire's fraying tapestry. But beneath the splendor lurked signs of weakness. Provincial governors defying imperial edicts, Italian republics carving out trade enclaves that bled the treasury dry. Agnes, fresh from the sea's turmoil, gazed upon the spectacle with child's wonder mixed with terror, her small hand clutching a French doll as if it could anchor her to home. Her first glimpse of the palace was overwhelming, a sprawl of marble and gold that dwarfed the sturdy stone keeps of France. Courtyards echoed with the splash of fountains, gardens bloomed with jasmine and roses imported from Persia, and pavilions draped in silk stirred in the Bosphorus breeze. This was no fortress for defense, but a stage for ceremony, its vulnerability a testament to Byzantine confidence, or arrogance. Agnes's initial meeting with Alexios II unfolded in the throne room, a cavernous space where whispers boomed and marble floors mirrored the scene like polished ice. The boy emperor perched on Constantine's ancient throne, his feet dangling, his purple robes pooling around him like spilled ink, the crown slipping over his eyes. Dressed in miniature imperial finery, Agnes recited Greek phrases she'd memorized, her voice a faint echo in the vastness, while Alexios responded with equal stiffness. Neither dared meet the other's gaze, their interaction a puppet show for the courtiers who scrutinized every twitch. The palace's rigid protocols enveloped Agnes like a second skin, dictating every hour with unyielding precision. She rose before dawn for prayers in the chapel, her knees aching against cold marble as she prostrated before icons that seemed to watch her with judgmental eyes. Meals were spectacles of excess, wines from Cyprus, honeyed fruits from Trebizond, dishes spiced with secrets from the East. Yet Agnes, seated beside Alexios at feasts, picked at her food, overwhelmed by the swirl of tongues, Greek, Latin, Arabic, and the stares of eunuchs, those smooth-faced guardians of secrets, who wielded power through whispers and gifts. These men castrated a sir without dynastic ambition, navigated the court's undercurrents with serpentine grace, their loyalty a commodity in a world of shifting allegiances. Amid this opulence, the shadow of Andronicus I Comnus loomed, the emperor's cousin, a man of 60 whose dark eyes pierced the festivities like daggers. Exiled for rebellions and scandals, Andronicus had returned in the vacuum of Manuel I's death, his presence a chill wind through the palace. Servants stiffened at his approach. Courtiers fell silent. Even the cats slunk away. Agnes sensed a tension, a child's intuition picking up what adults masked. This was a predator circling a weakened throne. Historical chronicles, like those of Nicetas Coniates, paint Andronicus as a charismatic tyrant, his ambitions fueled by the empire's fractures, the Seljuk incursions, Norman raids, and internal revolts that exposed Byzantium's brittle core. Agnes's isolation deepened in this alien court, a French girl adrift in a sea of protocol and plotting. She played with ivory dolls in chambers overlooking the Bosphorus, watching ships that might carry her home, while tutors drilled her in the empire's history, a saga of eagles soaring from Italy to the Euphrates, now clipped by enemies. The emotional strain was a quiet erosion. Whispers marked her as foreign, her accent a barrier, her youth a vulnerability in a place where children were tools, not treasures. Like other displaced brides, such as Bertha of Sulzbach, who wed Manuel I and navigated similar cultural chasms, Agnes embodied the human cost of diplomacy. As her wedding to Alexios approached, the Golden City's facade cracked further, revealing fragility beneath, where a child empress would soon stand at the altar of power. The wedding of Agnes and Alexios II was a spectacle of Byzantine grandeur, a ceremony that drowned the innocence of 2 children in a sea of ritual and ambition, where gold and incense masked the raw transaction of power. In 1180 AD, Agnes, swathed in silk that pooled around her feet like molten wine, could scarcely see over the altar in Hagia Sophia, her crown slipping over her eyes, its weight a throbbing ache against her skull. Alexios, pale and frail from the illness that gnawed at him, swayed beside her, his thin hands clutching the hem of his robes. The Orthodox service unfolded in a haze of Greek chants, alien to Agnes's ears, crowns of gold or stephana, linked by a ribbon symbolizing unity, placed upon their heads by priests whose voices boomed like thunder. The ritual, rich with symbolism from centuries of imperial tradition, spoke of spiritual bonds and divine favor. Yet for these children, it was a bewildering performance, their nods and extended hands prompted by hovering officials. Musicians filled the cathedral with haunting flutes, rhythmic castanets, and deep drums, the sounds weaving an ethereal spell that made the event feel like a fever dream. Agnes's heart pounded as the priest intoned blessings over union that neither child comprehended, her small fingers trembling as the ring, properly sized this time, slid onto her hand. The air was thick with myrrh and fear. The assembled dignitaries a sea of silk and jewels, their whispers slithering through the incense like venom. Andronicus loomed among them, his calculating gaze fixed on the children, a man whose scandals and exiles had honed him into a blade of ambition. At nearly 60, he watched with an intensity that chilled the air, his presence a harbinger of the power vacuum Manuel's death had left, where a boy emperor and his foreign bride were mere pieces in his game. The emotional chasm was profound. Agnes, still a girl who played with dolls, felt the weight of adult expectations crush her spirit, her eyes stinging with unshed tears amid the court's indifferent splendor. Medieval marriages like this were commonplace. Transactions where affection was a luxury, compared to the Carolingian era, where Charlemagne betrothed his 6-year-old daughter Rotrud to Constantine VI of Byzantium, only to break it off later. Treating children as diplomatic currency, Agnes's union echoed these, her fear a silent scream in a world that normalized such exploitation, where canon law's gnawed consent was a hollow ritual for the young and powerless. The feast that followed was a display of excess, courses of Cypriot wines, Trebizond fruits, and exotic delicacies parading before the high table where Agnes and Alexio sat, overwhelmed and silent. Conversation swirled in tongues she half understood, the court's eyes appraising her like a new acquisition. Andronicus's shadow lingered, his occasional glances a promise of turmoil, as palace cats slunk through the halls, sensing the unease that even children could feel. Agnes's wedding night was a farce of decorum, the massive bed swallowing her and Alexio's, separated by propriety and confusion, while physicians lurked to monitor her development, a clinical intrusion that stripped away any illusion of privacy. This ceremony wasn't love celebration, but powers theater, where two innocents were bound in a web of alliances fraying at the edges. As Agnes navigated her new role, the empire's decay pressed in, its opulence a thin veil over the storms to come. Life as a child empress in Constantinople was a relentless performance for Agnes of France, a 9-year-old caught in the gilded machinery of a dying empire, her days dictated by ceremonies that left no room for childhood. The palace, sprawling across 7 hills with its marble columns and jasmine-scented gardens, was a labyrinth of protocol where every gesture was scrutinized, every moment a test of her role as Alexio's Tus consort. She woke before dawn for prayers in the Hagia Sophia, her knees bruised against cold marble as she prostrated before icons of stern-faced saints, their gold halos flickering in candlelight. The Orthodox rituals, with their endless chants and incense clouds, felt like a foreign language to her French soul. Each prostration a reminder of her alienation in a court that saw her as a symbol, not a girl. Her tutors drilled her in Greek, their impatience sharpening as her accent betrayed her origins, while palace matrons corrected her posture, her voice, her very breath to align with Byzantine ideals of imperial femininity. Meals were no respite but spectacles of power, tables groaning under dishes from across the empire, roasted peacock, honeyed figs, wines that burned her throat, while courtiers watched her every move, their whispers slicing through the clink of golden goblets. Eunuchs, those enigmatic figures of Byzantine intrigue, hovered nearby, their soft voices and calculated gifts weaving webs of loyalty Agnes couldn't untangle. She sat beside Alexio's, whose coughing fits punctuated feasts, his frail body sinking deeper into his robes, blood-flecked handkerchiefs whisked away by servants who avoided her gaze. The boy emperor's illness, likely tuberculosis as hinted in Nicida's Coniates Chronicles, cast a pall over the palace, his weakness a beacon for predators like Andronicus I, whose footsteps echoed like a gathering storm. The empire itself was crumbling, its grandeur a facade masking economic and military decay, one stretching from Italy to the Euphrates. Byzantium now struggled to hold Anatolia against Seljuk Turks, whose raids bled the provinces dry. Italian republics, Venice, Genoa, siphoned wealth through trade privileges, their ships clogging the Golden Horn, while Byzantine merchants dwindled to suppliers of raw goods. Court records, like those preserved in the Chronographia, detailed treasuries strained by decades of war and bribes, provincial governors hoarding taxes, and a navy too weak to challenge Norman pirates. Agnes, though a child, sensed the unease. Guards less crisp in their salutes, servants slower to answer her calls, their eyes darting to Andronicus's growing influence. Her daily life was a crucible of isolation and expectation. Between prayers and feasts, she endured lessons in courtly dance, her small feet tripping in heavy silk gowns, and studied histories of empresses like Theodora, whose strength seemed unattainable to a girl still clutching ivory dolls. The emotional toll was relentless, her homesickness a quiet ache as she gazed at the Bosphorus, imagining French fields beyond the horizon, like other displaced royal women, such as Maria of Antioch, Manuel I's widow, who faced execution for treason. Agnes was a foreigner in a court that prized conformity, her youth no shield against its demands. She learned to master fear, her smiles practiced under tutors' watchful eyes, yet nights brought dreams of home, fractured by the coughs echoing from Alexios' chambers. The palace's beauty only deepened her loneliness. Fountains sang in courtyards, their melodies a cruel contrast to the tension within. Servants whisper of Andronicus's return from exile, his scandals, lovers' rebellions, cloaked in charisma that made him both feared and magnetic. Agnes, too young to grasp his ambitions, felt his gaze like a weight, his rare smiles chilling her more than the winter winds rattling her windows. As Alexios weakened, the court's pulse shifted, its loyalty drifting toward a man who would soon claim the throne, and Agnes herself. Her role as Empress, meant to symbolize unity, was becoming a fragile thread in a tapestry unraveling toward chaos. In September 1183 AD, the fragile illusion of Agnes's imperial life shattered with the death of Alexios II, a boy emperor whose brief reign ended in whispers of fever or poison, leaving a 12-year-old widow adrift in a sea of ambition and betrayal. The official cause was a lingering illness, his coughing fits finally silencing the palace's opulent chambers. But court murmurs, echoed in Nicida's Coniates Chronicles, hinted at darker hands, perhaps Andronicus' eyes, accelerating the inevitable to seize the throne. Agnes, now the Dowager Empress, stood beside the golden sarcophagus in Hagia Sophia, the cathedral's dome pressing down like divine judgment, its mosaics gleaming as priests chanted Orthodox dirges that filled the air with solemn thunder. Hundreds of candles cast flickering shadows, incense curling like souls ascending, while the sweet myrrh barely masked the undercurrent of fear among the mourners, a blend of grief and calculation in a court where death was but a step in the dance of power. The funeral was a masterpiece of Byzantine spectacle, robes of black silk absorbing light, pearls like frozen tears adorning the nobility. Agnes, veiled in mist-like gauze, felt the weight of her mourning gown, her small frame lost in its folds as she performed the gestures of grief drilled into her by palace officials. The procession snaked through cathedral, high clergy in embroidered vestments leading, followed by armored commanders and robed administrators, their hierarchies etched in every step. Alexios' body, clad in purple silk woven with tales of imperial triumphs, lay crowned with jewels from distant lands, sapphires from Ceylon, emeralds from Egypt, a final display of an empire's waning glory. For Agnes, the ceremony was a haze of terror. She gripped the sarcophagus edge, her husband's cold face a reminder of her own vulnerability in this nest of vipers. Andronicus wasted no time, declaring himself emperor days after the funeral, his usurpation a swift blade to the remnants of loyalty. The palace transformed overnight. Guards shifted allegiances without a murmur, imperial proclamations flooded the city, and routines bent to his will. Agnes, isolated in her chambers, felt the ground quake beneath her. Historical parallels abound in Byzantine succession crises, like the bloody ascent of Phocas in 602 AD or the intrigues under Constantinople. Where regents turned tyrants, widows became prizes. Andronicus, with his exile-hardened charisma, embodied this tradition, his dark eyes now fixed on Agnes as both a link to legitimacy and a conquest. His courtship was a calculated siege, beginning with paternal inquiries into her welfare during garden walks, his voice smooth as oiled silk, recounting empire histories like bedtime stories. Gifts followed, an ivory comb etched with myths, a silk scarf from distant looms, illuminated manuscripts that sparkled under candlelight. Agnes, torn between flattery and instinctual dread, found his presence suffocating, his cold gaze belying the warmth in his words. At 12, she was on the cusp of womanhood, her body changing under physicians' watchful eyes, yet emotionally a child thrust into an adult's nightmare. The emotional depth of her dread was a growing shadow. Nights haunted by Alexios' coughs now echoed with Andronicus' footsteps, her isolation deepening as servants averted eyes. Loyalists vanished. Andronicus' moves were strategic, his affection a veil for possession, ensuring his claim through marriage to the imperial widow. Agnes, powerless in a world where consent was a fiction, sensed the trap closing, her world shifting from child bride to pawn in a tyrant's game. As preparations for a new union loomed, the palace's splendor turned prison-like, its fountains mocking her trapped fate. The second marriage of Agnes of France, a 12-year-old widow forced into the arms of Andronicus I Comnus in October 1183 AD, was no union of hearts but brutal transaction of power, sealing her fate in a Byzantine court where ambition devoured innocence. The ceremony in Hagia Sophia was a stark contrast to her first wedding, its splendor not a celebration, but a declaration of conquest. Agnes walked the cathedral's aisle, her crown heavy with pearls and sapphires, its weight pressing her neck as if the empire itself demanded her submission. Her gown, woven in imperial purple and gold, shimmered like a trophy, while Andronicus stood at the altar, his gray-streaked beard and dark eyes radiating ownership rather than affection. The priest's chants, binding them in orthodox ritual, spoke of spiritual unity, but the golden Stephana crowns, linked by a ribbon, fell to Agnes like chains, their symbolism of partnership a cruel mockery of her reality. The court watched in tense silence, their applause more dutiful than joyous, aware that this marriage cemented Andronicus's usurpation. Silk banners draped the cathedral, depicting imperial triumphs, while candlelight danced on mosaics, creating an ethereal glow that belied the grim reality. Agnes's voice, barely a whisper as she recited her vows, contrasted with Andronicus's confident tones, his words those of a victor claiming a prize. The ring he slid onto her finger, perfectly sized for her young hand, was less a symbol of love than a mark of possession, its weight a constant reminder of her powerlessness. Palace officials had coached her in every gesture, but her movements were mechanical, her heart a fortress against the dread pooling within. This union echoed other coerced royal marriages, like that of Maria of Antioch, Manuelai's widow, forced into alliances to secure political ends, or the 9th century Byzantine princess Theophano went to a Frankish king to seal a fragile truce. These women, like Agnes, were pawns in dynastic chess, their bodies bartered to legitimize questionable claims. Canon law's requirement of consent was a farce. Agnes's silence was taken as agreement, her childhood no barrier to a man in his 6th decade. The emotional toll was crushing. At an age when French girls played with dolls, Agnes faced a husband whose scandals, lovers' rebellions, were whispered in every corridor, his touch a violation of her still-forming self. Her new chambers were a gilded prison, larger and more opulent than those she shared with Alexios, overlooking the Bosphorus where ships glided like specters of freedom. Silk tapestries depicted mythic unions of god and mortals, their beauty a cruel irony against her reality. Servants, once attentive, now moved with calculated efficiency, their vigilance a form of surveillance, while guards at every corner ensured her isolation. The palace's routines bent to Andronicus's will. Morning audiences showcase her as a symbol of continuity, her presence beside has thrown a visual claim to legitimacy, yet her opinions were irrelevant. Evening feasts demanded her grace, smiling ambassadors whose reports could sway empires, her every word weighed for diplomatic impact. The psychological scars were profound. Agnes learned to read Andronicus's moods, his temper a storm that could erupt over a misstep. forcing her to bury her fear beneath a mask of compliance. Like other royal women, such as Eudocia Macrem-Letissa, who navigated Byzantine intrigues through calculated deference, Agnes adapted to survive. Her childhood dreams replaced by strategies to avoid his wrath. The wedding night, a brutal initiation into adult realities, left her understanding marriage as domination, not partnership, a trauma echoed in chronicles like those of William of Tyre, where young bride suffering was a footnote to political necessity. As Andronicus's reign grew erratic, Agnes's world tightened, her every step shadowed by a tyrant whose empire teetered on collapse. The reign of Andronicus I Calmnus was a tempest of paranoia and brutality, and for Agnes of France, now 12 and bound to a tyrant, it was a descent into a world where power's fragility bred violence, and her role as Empress became a precarious tightrope walk. By 1185 AD, the Byzantine Empire was unraveling, its golden facade cracking under Andronicus's erratic rule. His military campaigns, launched with grandiose promises, collapsed into costly failures, draining a treasury already bled dry by decades of mismanagement. Seljuk Turks pressed from the east, Norman raiders carved out footholds in the west, and Venetian merchants tightened their grip on trade, turning Constantinople into a client of their maritime empire. Chronicles like those of Nicetas Coniates paint a grim picture. Provincial governors defied imperial edicts, taxes dwindled, and the palace guards' loyalty wavered, their salutes growing slack as Andronicus's paranoia poisoned the court. Agnes, trapped in her luxurious chambers, felt the empire's decay mirrored in her own isolation. Andronicus demanded her constant presence, positioning her beside his throne as a living emblem of legitimacy, her French lineage a tenuous link to Western alliances. Yet her role was ornamental. Her voice silenced in councils where generals planned doomed campaigns and advisors whisper rebellion. His possessiveness grew suffocating. Private moments became interrogations, her correspondence with France intercepted, her every word scrutinized for signs of disloyalty. Like other imperial consorts, such as Irene of Athens, who navigated treachery with calculated silence, Agnes learned to master fear. Her smiles a practiced shield against his volatile temper. Her chambers, with their Bosphorus views and silk tapestries, were a gilded cage, guarded by soldiers whose courtesy felt like surveillance. The end came swiftly in September 1185, when Constantinople's streets erupted in a fury that had simmered for years. The mob, inflamed by Andronicus's atrocities, executions of nobles, purges of imagined traitors, stormed the palace, their roars echoing through marble corridors like a tidal wave. Agnes, in her apartments, heard glass shatter and would splinter, the air thick with the stench of rage and smoke. Palace guards fled, servants barricaded themselves in storerooms, and even the cats, those silent sentinels of court, vanished into shadows. Andronicus, caught attempting to flee, met a gruesome fate. Dragged through streets he once ruled, his body torn apart by a crowd that repaid his cruelty in kind. Agnes, spared the sight but not the sound, huddled in her chambers. The mob screams a haunting reminder of her own vulnerability. The new emperor, Isaac II Angelos, faced a dilemma: what to do with a 14-year-old widow whose very existence tied her to a despised regime. Execution risked alienating France, where her half-brother Philip II Augustus held sway, but keeping her in Constantinople invited intrigue. Negotiations began, a delicate dance recorded in diplomatic letters preserved in French archives, to return Agnes to her homeland. For months, she lived under house arrest, her movements restricted, her meals delivered by wary servants who avoided her gaze. The palace, once a stage for her performative empresshood, became a prison of uncertainty, its fountains silent, its gardens overgrown. The emotional toll was profound. A child twice widowed, her innocence buried under years of exploitation, Agnes carried scars no crown could conceal. Her departure in 1186 was a quiet exodus, a French ship carrying her from the Golden Horn as Constantinople's skyline faded into mist. The journey home reversed her childhood voyage, but the girl who sailed was no longer the one who arrived 7 years earlier. Like other returned royal women, such as Anne of Kiev, who left Rus for France, Agnes bore the weight of a foreign court's imprint, her Greek fluency and Byzantine poise marking her as an outsider. As she sailed, the empire she left teetered toward the Fourth Crusade's devastation. Its fall is shadow over her own fractured story. Agnes of France's return to her homeland in 1186 AD was no triumphant homecoming, but a quiet exile, a 14-year-old former empress stepping onto French soil as a stranger shaped by Byzantine opulence and trauma. The fields of Champagne, once a distant memory of her childhood, now felt alien beneath her feet, their simplicity a stark contrast to the marble halls of Constantinople. She spoke Greek more fluently than French, her tongue tripping over familiar cadences of her native language. Her posture, rigid with Byzantine decorum, drew curious stares from French nobles accustomed to looser manners. The court of her half-brother, Philip II Augustus, received her with formal ceremony but an undercurrent of unease, her present a reminder of failed alliance that had cost France prestige and a princess her innocence. Chronicles, like those of Rigord, note her arrival with sparse detail, a footnote to Philip's growing ambitions against England. Yet her story whispers of a deeper wound, a girl forever marked by the weight of empires. Settled on estates granted by Philip, Agnes lived in relative obscurity, her title of Dowager Empress a hollow honor in a kingdom that had moved beyond the Byzantine Pact. Her days were filled with managing lands and attending religious services, the rhythm of prayers a faint echo of Hagia Sophia's chants. Yet, the psychological scars of her years in Constantinople lingered like shadows. The terror of Andronicus's possessive gaze, the violation of her second marriage, and the mob's roar during his fall haunted her quiet moments, her sleep fractured by memories of a palace that had been both prison and stage. Like other royal women returned from foreign courts, such as Anne of Kiev, who struggled to reintegrate after her marriage to Henry I, Agnes navigated a world that saw her as a relic, her experience as a curiosity rather than a tragedy. Proposals of marriage came, minor nobles eyeing her imperial connections and dowry, but Agnes refused them all, a choice rare for her era, whether driven by trauma or a quiet assertion of agency. Her refusal to remarry was a small rebellion against a life of being bartered. Medieval sources, like the Gesta Philippiae Augusti, are silent on her motives, but they hint at her withdrawal from courtly life, preferring the solitude of her estates to the intrigues of Paris. Her alienation was profound. She was neither fully French nor Byzantine, a hybrid forged in the crucible of diplomacy, her identity fractured by years of performing for others' ambitions. The emotional weight of this displacement was a silent burden, mirrored in modern studies of displaced royals, who often describe a sense of rootlessness after serving as pawns in foreign lands. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 AD, during the Fourth Crusade, must have struck Agnes like a personal blow. News of the city's fall, its dome shattered, its mosaics looted, reached France as she approached her 30s, a woman who had once walked its halls now watching its destruction from afar. The chronicles of Geoffrey of Villehardouin describe the Crusaders' brutality, a betrayal by Western Christians that echoed the betrayal Agnes felt in her own life. The city that shaped her, with its fountains and silk-draped chambers, was reduced to ashes, its memory a mirror to her own lost years. This event, marking Byzantium's collapse, underscored the futility of the alliances that had stolen her childhood, her marriages to Alexios and Andronicus achieving nothing but personal suffering. Agnes's later years, in around 1220 AD, were spent in quiet piety, her estates a refuge from a world that had used her and moved on. Her story, though obscure by history's focus on kings and wars, is a testament to survival, her silent a form of defiance against a system that valued her only as currency. As we turn to her legacy, Agnes's resilience illuminates the enduring fight of women against exploitation, her life a bridge between medieval cruelty and modern struggles for autonomy. The life of Agnes of France, a child traded for empires and widowed twice by 14, is not just a tale of medieval sacrifice, but a haunting mirror to the persistent exploitation of women's bodies and agency across centuries. Her story, etched in the cold marble of Constantinople's palaces and the quiet field of her French exile, reveals the brutal arithmetic of political marriage. Where a girl's worth was measured in alliances and dowries, her humanity a footnote to power. Agnes's resilience, enduring the Gilded Cage of Byzantium, the predatory grasp of Andronicus' eye, and the alienation of her return, stands as a quiet rebellion against a system that sought to erase her. By the time she died around 1220 AD, Her life had spanned the fall of an empire and the rise of a new Europe, yet her legacy whispers in the courage of those who defy oppression today. The medieval world that shaped Agnes normalized the commodification of young women, a practice echoed in other eras and cultures, like the child brides of the Carolingian court or the Ottoman harem, where girls as young as 10 were bartered for peace. Agnes was a pawn in a Game of Thrones, her childhood sacrificed to fleeting diplomatic gains. The Byzantine court's obsession with protocol and legitimacy, seen in chronicles like Nisida's Coniates, mirror broader medieval values that place dynastic purity above individual dignity. This mindset lingers in modern practices. Child marriage persists in regions like South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where UNICEF reports over 12 million girls are wed before 18 each year, often to secure family honor or economic stability. These unions, like Agnes's, prioritize power over personhood, their victims carrying scars of trauma akin to those hinted at in her silent French years. The psychological toll of Agnes's life, uprooted at 8, wed to a dying boy, then forced into Andronicus's bed, echoes modern accounts of survivors of forced marriage or trafficking. Medieval sources are sparse, but the Gesta Philippi Augusti suggests a withdrawal from court life, a retreat into solitude that mirrors what psychologists describe as dissociation, a coping mechanism for those enduring repeated violation. Her refusal to remarry, a rare act of agency, parallels the defiance of women like Malala Yousafzai, who reject cultural scripts to reclaim their futures. Agnes's story, though buried in history's margins, resonates in these acts of resistance, where women transform suffering into strength. The Fourth Crusade sack of Constantinople in 1204, which Agnes lived to hear of, was a final irony. A city that had exploited her childhood, reduced to rubble by the very Western powers her marriage sought to align. This destruction, detailed in Geoffrey of Villehardouin's accounts, marked the end of Byzantium's glory, rendering her sacrifices futile. Yet her endurance offers a timeless lesson. Even in the face of overwhelming power, agency can be carved out in small, stubborn acts. Her silence in France, her rejection of further marriages, was a refusal to be bartered again, a quiet echo of the whispered networks of medieval women who shared secrets to subvert their chains. Today, Agnes's courage speaks to global fights for bodily autonomy, from campaigns against child marriage to movements challenging systemic abuse. Organizations like Girls Not Brides, inspired by survivor stories, push for laws banning underage unions, echoing Agnes's unspoken defiance. Her life, a thread in the tapestry of history, reminds us that the battle for control over one's body is as old as empires and as urgent as today's headlines. The cathedral where she stood at 8, trembling under a too-heavy ring, is gone, its stones scattered by crusaders' greed. But Agnes's spirit endures in every woman who stands against violation, her story a beacon for those who fight be more than pawns.